What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Esoteric Ebb, a bizarre little title that honestly answers the question of what would you get if you combine Disco Elysium with 5th edition D&D, and the answer is a surprisingly interesting game. Worth a mention at the beginning of the video here, though, I am bringing you this from a public demo that is available over on Steam, so if any of this looks interesting to you, you can go play it for yourself. It does not look like this game has a release date anytime soon, but it did recently pick up a publisher via Raw Fury, which has allowed them to refine the art and the like. But the real story here is the story itself, because we play as a rather generically named The Cleric. Although you do technically have an actual name, that's more boring. Now the gist of this is we have to take our version of The Cleric and solve a few mysteries around a given town in this sort of homebrew D&D-esque world that the developer describes as arcane punk, which seems to be a blending of mostly D&D worlds with, I would say, some more modern takes on things. But the gist of it is the cleric effectively works for the city being, I believe, Tolstad, and we have been sent to get to the bottom of a recent explosion at a tea shop, which then naturally unfolds and unfurls into a much wider conspiracy about the what and the why. Now, we are going to do that with our version of the cleric, which we specify by picking things like a background, setting up our various attributes, picking some proficiencies in them even, and you can even pick from pre-built if you don't want to deal with the headache of actually rolling all this out, and then you can also do a randomized version, which is effectively like having the game roll the dice for you. But this is going to give you the appropriate bonuses to each of these attributes, and those attributes act like voices in your head, much in the way we see with something like Disco Elysium, which is where that side of thing comes in, because the game is very, very text heavy. And you'll see much of this represented in the various conversations you can have, and also much like Disco Elysium, they do manage to make failure pretty interesting. I laughed a lot while playing through this demo, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Now, in addition to sort of rolling out your character, we also have more traditional D&D stuff. We can actually pick up a variety of different spells to use, though we do have to learn them because our cleric at the very start of the game sort of comes back from the dead. We quite literally die and then somehow get resurrected, which means we have to piece together what we were doing, why we were attacked, how this relates back to the main goal of investigating this tea house as an example. But that's kind of the reason why we have to do some progression here. So again, we are going to be picking up various spells by learning them from either interacting with people or just finding them in the environment via scrolls. And our character does in fact have spell slots, all that usual stuff. The demo having some first and second level spells available that you can use to either converse with people or switch up various situations. Now, what's really interesting to me, though, is this does actually include combat. And while that is handled via the text events that you would expect from a game like this, it honestly pretty reminiscent of how you might handle a more story-focused combat encounter within D&D or TTRPGs in general, which I thought was interesting, because basically the way it goes is that both you and the enemy take turns in dialogue, and you'll actually roll skills to determine what you're trying to do in an individual thing. So while it doesn't exactly function off of the back of things like attack rolls and all that, it does have a slightly more functional combat system than you might expect from games like this. And some of that relates back to the equipment your character will be wearing, which does include things like some armor and some weapons available to you, many of which will give you either bonuses or detriments to our various attributes, which then affects the bonus we get when we roll those dice against things, which can then lead to a whole host of hilarious outcomes. Now, what I actually really liked most about this game was how a lot of the writing was handled. So the game has a very funny way of introducing sort of traditional Dungeons & Dragons type-esque concepts and lore to you, but through the lens of a character that doesn't know anything about them, or does know about them and is just being ridiculous, or entirely normal about it. And you kind of get to pick the avenue of approach there, which means you can have these funny interactions where you, the player, might be learning about something, or simply appreciating the nonsensical approach the writing to it takes here. In fact, one of my favorite conversations in this demo, I was talking to this pencil-pushing devil, our imp friend here, and you could actually have a whole host of conversations with him about the way law is applied in this particular land, including some ethically interesting consequences to, say, murder charges. For instance, they talk about if a character gets sentenced to murder but is then later resurrected, are they still liable for the crime, having technically endured their punishment of simply being put to death? And that's why recent laws have changed the death statutes for certain crimes to change it to death in perpetuity, meaning that the punishment for the crime is that they stay dead and not just be resurrected afterwards. Now, to accompany us on our journey here, it does look like we will actually wind up with some party members. We get one in the form of a goblin who's going to help investigate the goings-on that we are investigating, though the demo is short enough that we don't really see the full extent of that, but you do have some followers, at least. And yet, all of that, everything I just mentioned, is also set against the backdrop of the city itself that we find ourselves in, hosting an election with a whole bunch of different political factions that are obviously vying for support in this upcoming election. And there's also some interesting lore in the backdrop of that in regards to the most famous wizard of the land who founded a lot of things, alongside the god we are actually a cleric of, as an example. So this game's got a lot of stuff going on. I think a lot of it is really interesting. I think the writing is really sharp in particular, and I think this game goes a long way towards utilizing more familiar TTRPG systems in a really novel way, especially with that sort of Disco Elysium spin on it. And combining all of that, I really liked a lot of this. I thought a lot of this was a fantastic time, and this demo has genuinely sold me on this one. So while there is not a release date forthcoming anytime soon, when this game does eventually launch, definitely expect a review from it, out of me at least. Because this demo is a great experience, and I'd honestly encourage you to try it out for yourself. But as for today, I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this particular video. Do let me know what you think about this one down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.